Hello and welcome to the Sleepy World. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're lying down with the lights off, gently dozing on the couch, or just letting your mind float a little before sleep, this space is made for you tonight. We'll be taking a quiet journey through something vast and visible and quietly powerful, the carbon cycle, a story of breath, stone, sunlight. And time now, I should warn you I've done my very best to make this video deeply calming. But there's always a risk it might end up being a bit too interesting if it accidentally keeps you awake. Well, at least you'll drift off a little wiser if you're enjoying this moment. Already, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave the video a gentle like, and maybe even subscribe for more cozy science like this. It really does help more sleepy minds find their way here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the map of bedtime slowly light up, as always this video is for relaxation and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be medical advice or a substitute for sleep therapy or professional help. What is carbon? It's a fair question. It might even sound like something from a high school chemistry test you vaguely remember taking, probably next to a coffee you were too tired to drink. But don't worry, tonight we're not diving into textbooks. We're floating into the very heart of what life is made of. Carbon is one of the simplest elements in the universe, and yet it's also one of the most astonishingly versatile on the periodic table. Carbon is represented by the letter C. It's number 6, meaning it has 6 protons tucked into its nucleus. Just 6, not too many, not too few. But with that little atomic structure, carbon can do something rather magical. It can form an extraordinary range of bonds with other atoms, including itself. You see, carbon is what chemists lovingly call tetravalent. That means it has 4 valence electrons. It wants to form 4 bonds. Imagine a tiny molecular handshake with 4 open hands. That's carbon, always ready to link up with its neighbors. And when it does, it creates chains, rings, branches, sheets, and even interlocking cages. It is the ultimate builder. In fact, if atoms were tiny Lego bricks, carbon would be that one brick you keep coming back to, the 4-pronged kind that just seems to fit with everything. You want to build a plant, you'll need carbon, a panda carbon, a chocolate chip cookie. You guess it, carbon, you listening. Right now, you are quite literally made of carbon along with water. It makes up most of your mass. Carbon is in your bones, your breath, your brain. You're a walking, talking carbon arrangement with a Netflix subscription and a fondness for comfy blankets. But carbon isn't just hanging out in living things. It's everywhere. It drifts invisibly through the air as carbon dioxide. It sleeps deep inside ancient rocks. It bubbles up through volcanoes. It rides the waves and ocean currents and hides in the bodies of whales, worms, and water leaves. Now, a quick moment to get technical, but gently, carbon has several different forms called allotropes. Depending on how its atoms are arranged, carbon can become something soft and dark like graphite, or something clear and incredibly hard like diamond. Both are pure carbon. One writes your grocery list, the other goes in engagement rings. Same ingredient, just rearranged. That's the magic of bonding. And speaking of bonding, carbon doesn't like being alone. It loves to mingle in the presence of hydrogen. It forms hydrocarbons. Those are molecules made of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Some of them are gases like methane, others are liquids like gasoline or oils, others still are waxy solids. Hydrocarbons are the basis of fossil fuels, but they're also found in living organisms, in everything from your fingernails to the fat in an avocado. With oxygen, carbon forms carbon dioxide, or CO2. This molecule is tiny, colorless, and incredibly important. It's what you exhale every time you breathe out. Trees inhale it during photosynthesis. Oceans absorb it. Volcanoes belch it. And if too much builds up in the atmosphere, it starts acting like a very warm, invisible blanket, trapping heat and gently nudging the climate. But we'll save that story for another time. What's most impressive about carbon is how central it is to life on Earth. It's often called the backbone of biology because organic chemistry, the chemistry of life, is basically the chemistry of carbon. All living things from amoebas to elephants share dependence on carbon-based molecules like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Proteins made of carbonyl amino acids build your muscles, carry oxygen in your blood, and make up enzymes that help with just about everything. Carbohydrates, also rich in carbon, provide energy to cells. Lipids like fats and oil store the energy, keep you warm, and insulate your nerves. And DNA, as the spiraling code that carries your genetic instructions, is built on a carbon framework too. If you were to zoom into a single cell in your body, you'd find carbon in every corner. It's the structure of your cellular walls, the spark behind chemical reactions of stuff in your energy molecules, and even the soft scaffold that holds your shape. And just when you think carbon couldn't possibly be more important, it gets even more interesting. Carbon is also a cosmic element. It was born in the hearts of ancient stars billions of years ago, when the universe was young and a bit too hot to be cozy. Only the simplest elements like hydrogen and helium existed, but as stars began to burn and fuse atoms in their cores, heavier elements formed. Carbon among them. When those stars eventually exploded as supernova, they scattered carbon across space. That carbon drifted to the void, eventually becoming part of planets and us. So the carbon in your fingernail, or in your breath, or in the oat milk in your fridge, it was made inside a star billions of years old. Stardust, quite literally. Carl Sagan was right. We are made of star stuff, and carbon is the sparkling thread that links us to that ancient past, because carbon can form so many stable structures and interact so flexibly with other elements. Scientists have long wondered whether alien life, if it exists, might be built on a different element. Could life out there be based on silicon, for example? It's in the same column on the periodic table. But so far, carbon remains unmatched in its complexity, diversity, and elegance. If you're looking to build something squishy, mobile, adaptable, and self-replicating, carbon is your go-to. Even our most advanced technologies are still discovering new ways to use it. Graphene, for example, is a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a honeycomb pattern. It's stronger than steel, conducts electricity like a dream, and might revolutionize everything from electronics to energy storage and carbon nanotubes. Tiny cylindrical structures are being explored for everything from space elevators to drug delivery systems. And yet, despite all this high-tech glamour, carbon is profoundly humble. It's in the charcoal under your barbecue, the fizz in your fizzy drinks, the smudge of soot on your fingers after lighting a candle. It doesn't sparkle like gold or shine like silver, but it's infinitely more essential. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might think of carbon a little differently. It's not just a dry scientific term. It's the element that holds you together, that links you to trees and whales and ancient stars. It is quiet, stable, adaptable, and everywhere. And while it may only be 6 tiny protons at heart, carbon has built the world we know one bond at a time. Let's take a deep breath together, in and out. That exhale you just release, it contained carbon dioxide, tiny invisible molecules floating silently into the air. You can't see them, you can't feel them, but they're drifting into the atmosphere, joining a global dance that has been going on for billions of years. Tonight, we're following carbon into the air, into the skies above, and the spaces between, to explore one of the most delicate and important roles carbon plays, its presence in the atmosphere. First, let's paint the scene. The Earth's atmosphere is like a blanket, thin and protective, wrapped gently around our planet. It keeps temperature stable, filters harmful rays, and gives us the breath of life. It's mostly made of nitrogen, about 78%, and oxygen, about 21%. The rest, just a sliver of the total. That tiny sliver, less than 1%, is where we find water vapor, argon, and carbon-based gases like carbon dioxide and methane. These are called greenhouse gases, and even though they're few in number, they wield a powerful influence. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, makes up only a tiny fraction of the atmosphere, just over 400 parts per million. That means for every 1 million molecules in the air, only a little over 400 are CO2, not a lot. And yet, without it, our planet would be a lifeless ball of ice. Carbon dioxide helps trap warmth in the atmosphere, holding on to the sun's energy like a cozy quilt. It's part of what keeps Earth habitable, keeping temperatures in the friendly zone for oceans, forests, foxes, and late-night thinkers like you. How does CO2 get into the atmosphere? There are many ways. The simplest is the one you just did. Breathing. All animals, including humans, exhale carbon dioxide as we metabolize the food we eat, breaking it down for energy. Carbon is released as a waste product. Every sigh, every whisper, every sleepy yawn sends a little more CO2 into the air plants to play. They're part during the night, when the sun is absent and photosynthesis shuts. Down plants actually respire like we do. They use up oxygen and release carbon dioxide, but by day they more than make up for it by taking in carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, helping to pull carbon out of the air and lock it into leaf stems and roots. Fires are another source. When wood or coal or oil burns, it releases the carbon stored inside. Forest fires, campfires, even candles contribute. The process is called combustion. It breaks down complex carbon molecules and releases them into the air. In the form of CO2, the same goes for volcanoes, which release ancient carbon trapped deep within the earth. Even soil can release carbon dioxide as microbes digest decaying organic matter. Earth, it turns out, is constantly exhaling methane, is another carbon-based gas in the atmosphere. And though it's present in much smaller amounts, only about 2 parts per million, it's far more potent when it comes to trapping heat over a 20-year period. Methane is more than 80 times as powerful as carbon dioxide in its warming effect. Methane comes from many sources too: wetlands, rice paddies, landfills, and the digestive systems of animals like cows and sheep. Yes, cows contribute to climate change one burp at a time, but carbon doesn't just enter the air and stay there forever. It's part of a cycle after all. So while we're constantly adding carbon to the atmosphere, nature also has a remarkable ability to pull it back out. This removal happens in several ways. First, there's photosynthesis, the quiet work of green. Plants, trees, grasses, algae, and even tiny phytoplankton in the ocean pull carbon dioxide from the air and use it to build sugars, which become the foundation of all living things in doing. So they act as natural carbon sinks. A forest is more than a collection of trees. It's a breathing carbon store machine. Then there's the ocean. The vast blue stretches of sea are among the planet's largest carbon sinks. Carbon dioxide dissolves into the water at the surface, forming carbonic acid. Some of that gets used by marine organisms like corals and shellfish to build calcium carbonate shells. When these organisms die, their shells settle to the ocean floor, slowly turning into sedimentary rock. Over millions of years, the ocean is not just a scenic escape, it's a chemical partner in Earth's carbon dance. Another way carbon leaves the atmosphere is through soil. When plants die and decompose, some of their carbon ends up in the soil. Healthy living soil stores vast amounts of carbon, especially when rich in organic matter and microbial life. Some farming practices aim to increase this kind of storage, helping trap atmospheric carbon underground where it stays for decades or even centuries. But here's where things get a little tricky. The balance between carbon going into the atmosphere and carbon coming out of it is delicate. For most of Earth's history, natural processes kept this balance relatively stable. Carbon would rise and fall, then rise again in a slow, rhythmic cycle influenced by seasons, climate, volcanic activity, and biological life. Today, that balance has shifted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In the late 1700s, humans have been adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere at a rapidly increasing pace. We dig up coal, pump oil, burn gas, cut down forests, and churn out cement. Each action releasing stored carbon that have been locked away for thousands or even millions of years. It's like opening all the jars in the pantry at once. The result: CO2 levels are higher now than at any point in the past 800,000 years. In fact, scientists have carefully measured ancient air bubbles trapped in ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland. These frozen time capsules reveal the atmospheric composition going back hundreds of thousands of years, and what they show is striking a relatively steady carbon level through ice ages and warm periods until the modern era, when levels shoot upward in a steep, sharp spike. It's a geological blink of an eye with far-reaching consequences. Now, to be clear, carbon dioxide itself is not a pollutant. It's a natural part of the atmosphere and absolutely essential to life. Without it, we wouldn't have plants. Without plants, we wouldn't have food. Without food, well, that's a grim bedtime story we won't tell. The problem is not CO2 itself. It's the amount, like salt in soup or sugar. And tea too much upsets the balance. And that brings us to the concept of radiative forcing. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's actually quite straightforward. Radiative forcing refers to the change in energy balance in Earth's atmosphere caused by greenhouse gases. When more energy enters the Earth system then leaves at the planet warms carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases trap some of the infrared radiation that would otherwise escape into space. That's good up to a point, but when concentrations rise too high, more heat gets trapped and is healthy for ecosystems. Weather patterns or sea levels. The warming effect of carbon in the air doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, cumulative, and sometimes surprising as the air warms. So do the oceans, which can then release more dissolved CO2 permafrost thaws, releasing methane. Forests dry out, making them more vulnerable to fire. Each feedback adds a little more carbon to the air, nudging the thermostat further up. But let's not end a chapter on a heavy note, because here's the quiet miracle. The carbon in the air is also the carbon in a falling leaf, in a sunflower, in a handful of garden soil. It's the carbon in your breath, in your tea, in your pillow. It moves in and out of the atmosphere, not randomly, but rhythmically, like a sleeping planet drawing slow, steady breaths. So next time you exhale, remember you're taking part in an ancient exchange. You're sending carbon into the air, yes, but that carbon is destined for somewhere else. A tree might catch an ocean wave, might dissolve with a blade of grass, might hold it in its green veins. It's not lost, it's just moving carbon, and the air is not static. It's part of planetary conversation, a give and take, a balance of breath. And for all its power to change climate and shape futures, it's still made up of the tiniest building blocks, drifting quietly, waiting for their next connection. Let's take a walk through the forest, not the noisy, squirrel-filled daylight forest, but a quiet one. At dusk, the sun has dipped below the horizon, and the leaves are still. You pause and take a slow breath. All around you, the forest is holding its breath too. What you can't see is the invisible dance of carbon taking place, moving through branches, slipping through roots, nestled inside bark and leaves, and everything that buzzes and grows. Tonight, we're exploring the role carbon plays in life itself. And when it comes to biology, carbon is nothing short of the leading actor to understand. Life, you have to understand molecules, not in the scary high school chemistry way with pop quizzes and lab goggles, but in the gentle or struck way that realizes just how astonishing it is that living things are made of tiny, invisible arrangements of atoms. And of all the atoms in your body, none is more essential or more abundant than carbon. Your body is made up of trillions upon trillions of cells, and inside every single one of them, carbon is working behind the scenes. Carbon atoms are the backbone of all the most important molecules in your body. They hold together proteins, which build muscle and perform countless biological tasks. They link into long chains in carbohydrates, storing energy that keeps your cells alive and humming to help form fats and oils, which keep your body insulated and your brain functioning smoothly. And they knit together the spiral staircase of your DNA, carrying your genetic code from one generation to the next. Every structure in your body, your skin, your hair, your blood, your bones, relies on carbon. It's the skeleton of life, not in a spooky Halloween way, but in a deeply literal one. If we zoom on a single protein, we'll find that carbon atoms form the core of its structure, linking with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur to create shapes that can twist, fold, and flex. These shapes aren't just pretty, they're functional. Proteins act as enzymes, speeding up reactions, repairing cells, moving molecules around. Without carbon, these proteins would collapse. Life would grind to a halt. Let's visit sugars for a moment, specifically glucose, one of the simplest and most important carbohydrates. It's a ring of 6 carbon atoms bonded with 12 hydrogen atoms and 6 oxygen atoms. That's a neat little bundle of energy ready to be used when your body needs fuel. It breaks down glucose, releasing energy in a controlled burn. That energy powers your muscles, your brain, and even the movement of your fingers as you adjust your pillow. But carbon isn't only in humans, it's in every living thing on Earth. Every blade of grass, every ant, every tree, every jellyfish. Carbon is a universal thread weaving through bacteria, birds, bears, and bionas. That's because all known life is carbon-based. In fact, carbon-based chemistry is so good at building complex molecules that scientists believe any alien life we discover, if it exists, will likely also be carbon-based. There are other possibilities, of course, like silicon-based life, which science fiction loves to imagine, but so far carbon is the only atom we know that's flexible, stable, and sociable enough to build something as complicated and fragile as life. So, how does carbon get into living things in the first place? It starts with plants using sunlight. As an energy source, plants pull carbon dioxide from the air and combine it with water to form sugars. This process, known as photosynthesis, is the engine of life on Earth. It's how atmospheric carbon becomes biological carbon A. Tree might start out as a seed with only a whisper of carbon inside it, but over years it draws in carbon dioxide from the air and turns into solid with root, bark, and leaf. When animals eat those plants or eat other animals that ate the plants, they absorb the carbon too. That's how it gets into your breakfast. The oats in your oatmeal came from a plant that drew carbon from the sky. The banana you slice on top, also a carbon collector. Even the milk or oat milk you poured came from an organism that took in carbon, stored it, and passed it along. In this way, carbon flows through the food chain, passing from one living thing to another. And it's not just animals and plants, microbes, the tiny, often single-celled organisms that live in soil, water, and even in you are also part of this cycle. In fact, microbes play a massive role in managing the carbon content of ecosystems. They help decompose dead material, returning carbon to the soil, or releasing it into the atmosphere your body alone hosts. Trillions of these tiny organisms, most of them living in your gut, their job, among other things, breaking down complex carbon compounds from food so you can absorb the nutrients. That's right, your microbiome is not only essential to digestion and immunity, it's also a carbon processing center. Fungi deserve an honorable mention too. These quiet recyclers form vast underground networks called mycorrhizae, which connect with plant roots and help them absorb nutrients, including carbon-based sugars in return. Fungi get a steady supply of energy. It's a symbiotic exchange that's been happening for hundreds of millions of years. Some scientists even call it the Wood Wide Web. As you lie back and let your thoughts drift, consider this: the carbon in your body today may once have been a tree or a beetle or a whale or a puff of volcanic gas from a mountain. Carbon is constantly moving past from one form of life to another, recycled over and over again through breath, food growth, and decay. You're not only made of carbon, you're borrowing it, and eventually that carbon will move on. When a living organism dies, its carbon doesn't disappear, it's returned to the environment through decomposition. Bacteria and fungi break down the body, releasing carbon back into the soil and air. Some of it might be absorbed by a nearby plant, some might drift back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, some might become part of fossil locked away for millions of years. It's a beautiful symmetry. Life gives carbon structure and death returns it to the cycle. Nothing is wasted. And because carbon is so stable and flexible, the same atoms can be used again and again. The carbon in your hand might have once been part of fern in the Jurassic period, or a fish in the Devonian, or even a dinosaur that snored peacefully under the stars. Of course, some forms of life handle carbon differently. Coral reefs, for example, build their skeletons from calcium carbonate, a combination of calcium carbon and oxygen. Over time, these reefs grow into massive structures, storing carbon in solid mineral form. Shellfish do the same, turning carbon into protective shells. When they die, their shells settle on the ocean floor, becoming part of the carbon record layer upon layer. Even human technology interacts with carbon in life. When we burn fossil fuels, ancient remains of plants and animals, we release stored biological carbon that have been buried underground for millions of years. It's a reminder of how deeply life and carbon are connected, not just now, but across deep time in our daily lives. We rarely think about it, but the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the cells that form our bodies are all part of this enormous ancient cycle. The carbon in life is not just chemical, it's personal. It's in your laughter, your movement, your dreams. It's in the stories you tell, the warmth of your skin, and the way you stretch when you wake up. So as you rest tonight, know that your body is made of borrowed stardust. You're a collection of carbon atoms arranged just so, humming with energy, ready to move, to feel, to think. The same carbon that built you may one day become part of a bird's wing or a redwood tree or a pebble on the ocean floor. You are part of a continuum, a whisper in the story of life. And that story, as it turns out, is written in carbon. Close your eyes if they aren't already, and imagine the sea not just a surface where the waves roll and glisten in the moonlight, but the depths, the silent blue beneath where sunlight fades and currents drift like ghostly rivers the ocean, is vast, covering more than 70% of Earth's surface. It is deep, mysterious, and always moving. But tonight, we're not just taking a relaxing mental swim, we're following carbon into the ocean where it performs a quiet, complex dance that helps stabilize the planet and keeps life thriving in places we barely understand. When most people think of carbon, they think of it in the air, maybe in the food we eat, or in the coal used for energy. But the ocean is in fact the largest active carbon sink on the planet. It holds roughly 38,000 billion tons of carbon, nearly 50 times more than the atmosphere. Let that sink in for a moment. If the atmosphere were a light, misty ocean would be a vast hidden reservoir, a deep and cold treasury where carbon moves between forms, waiting patiently. The carbon in the ocean exists in multiple forms. Some of it is carbon dioxide, just like in the air, but much more of it exists as dissolved carbon compounds like bicarbonate and carbonate. Ions, these dissolved forms, are key to understanding how carbon is stored, used, and eventually moved back into the atmosphere or the earth itself. So how does carbon get into the ocean in the first place? It begins at the surface. The interface between air and water may look calm and thin, but it's actually a lively exchange zone where gases are traded like stocks in a very patient, very quiet marketplace. When carbon dioxide in the atmosphere comes into contact with the ocean surface, it can dissolve into the water just like the fizz in your soda CO2 can slip into liquid form. This process depends on things like temperature, wind wave action, and the concentration of CO2 on either side of the boundary. Cold water, for example, can absorb more carbon dioxide than warm water. That's why polar oceans are especially important carbon sinks. They act like the lungs of the sea, inhaling CO2 where the water is chilly and dense. Once carbon dioxide enters the ocean, it reacts with water to form carbonic acid. This is a weak acid, nothing dramatic, but it starts a chain of reactions. Carbonic acid splits into bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions, and those bicarbonate ions can further dissociate into carbonate ions and more hydrogen ions. These different forms of carbon make up what's known as the ocean's dissolved inorganic carbon pool. It's not as glamorous as coral reefs or shimmering schools of fish, but it's absolutely vital. These molecules buffer the ocean's pH, affect its ability to absorb more CO2, and serve as raw materials for countless marine processes. Now, not all of this carbon stays dissolved forever. Some of it is taken up by marine organisms, particularly the tiny heroes of the sea, phytoplankton. These microscopic algae float near the ocean surface, harnessing sunlight through photosynthesis. They draw in carbon dioxide from the water and use it to build their tiny bodies. In doing so, they help remove carbon from the surface and lock it into biological form. This brings us to the ocean's biological plumbing name that might sound like a sci-fi contraption, but is, in fact, one of the most elegant processes on Earth. Here's how it works. Phytoplankton absorb CO2 and grow tiny zooplankton. Eat the phytoplankton. Fish eat the zooplankton. Eventually, all of these creatures produce waste shed cells, or die. When that happens, the carbon contained in their body starts to sink. Some of it drifts down slowly as what scientists poetically call marine snow, a constant gentle rain of organic matter. Falling into the deep, most of this carbon is recycled before it gets very far, gobbled up by scavengers and microbes in the upper layers, but a small fraction escapes consumption and makes it into the deep ocean, where it can remain for hundreds of thousands of years. The sinking material is critical. It helps sequester carbon away from the atmosphere, storing it in the dark depths where it no longer contributes to surface warming. It's as if the ocean wraps it in a blanket of darkness and tucks it away for safekeeping. And the deeper it goes, the longer it stays. Some of this carbon even reaches the seafloor, where it becomes part of sediments that, over millions of years, may eventually form rock. The deep ocean is the planet's slow, quiet archive for carbon. But let's come back up to the surface, where another important process is happening: calcification. Many marine organisms, like corals, mollusks, and certain plankton, use carbonate ions in the water to build shells and skeletons made of calcium carbonate. These shells are beautiful and strong, and they also store carbon in solid mineral form. When these creatures die, their shells often fall to the seafloor. Over time, they accumulate and become limestone and chalk, geological records of ancient life. in places like the White Cliffs of Dover or the limestone caves in Southeast Asia, you can see the result of the slow accumulation. Those towering white cliffs were built grain by microscopic marine organisms or shells packed together over tens of millions of years now stand as monuments to the power of tiny creatures and the quiet patience of carbon now as serene as this all sounds the ocean's role in the carbon cycle is not without its challenges. As we add more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, more of it gets absorbed by the ocean. At first, this might seem like a good thing to keep CO2 out of the air after all, but there's a limit to how much the ocean can take without changing. The more carbon dioxide the ocean absorbs, the more carbonic acid it forms. This increases the acidity of seawater in a process called ocean acidification. Since the beginning of the industrial era, the pH of the ocean surface has dropped by about 0.1 units. That might not sound like much, but because the pH scale is logarithmic, it represents about a 30% increase in acidity. That's enough to cause problems for shell-forming organisms whose calcium carbonate structures can begin to dissolve in more acidic water for young shellfish corallae and planktonic creatures. This is not just uncomfortable, it's life-threatening. If they can't form shells properly, their survival is at risk. And because these creatures sit at the base of the food chain, their decline can ripple upward, affecting fish, marine mammals, and even humans who depend on seafood. Coral reefs, often called the rainforest of the sea, are especially vulnerable. These vibrant ecosystems are already stressed by warming waters, pollution, and overfishing. Ocean acidification adds another layer of pressure, making it harder for corals to build and maintain their skeletons. Some reefs are bleaching, crumbling, or simply failing to grow. Even fish behavior is being affected. Studies suggest that increased CO2 levels in water can alter the way some fish navigate, avoid predators, or find food. The ocean, it turns out, is not just a chemical soup, it's a delicate web of relationships finely tuned to its carbon chemistry. But it's not all doom and gloom. Scientists, marine biologists, and conservationists are studying these changes closely, searching for ways to protect ocean ecosystems. Some efforts focus on restoring seagrass beds and mangroves, which are excellent at storing carbon. These coastal ecosystems not only absorb CO2 but also provide shelter for young fish and help buffer shorelines from storms. There are also experimental projects aimed at enhancing the ocean's natural ability to store carbon. Some proposals involve adding iron to certain ocean areas to stimulate plankton growth, which could increase carbon drawdown. Others explore cultivating seaweed on a large scale, then sinking it to the deep sea to sequester carbon. These ideas are still in early stages and come with significant ecological questions, but they reflect a growing awareness of how vital the ocean's carbon role is. And so, as you lie here tonight, listening, maybe picturing the rolling surf or the quiet press of water beneath the waves, remember this: the ocean is not just water, it is a living, breathing system that absorbs carbon, processes it, stores it, and slowly, gracefully moves around the globe. It is home to creatures great and small, from singing whales to drifting jellyfish to microscopic plankton. All of them in one way or another are part of carbon's underwater journey. Even the sea breeze on your face, the salt in the air, and the scent of the tide, they are touched by carbon moving in and out of the water. Carbon does not stay still, it flows, it cycles, it drifts in the ocean. It becomes part of shells, a current of life and loss in stone. So the next time you watch a wave crash or feel the pull of the tide, know that somewhere in that motion is a molecule of carbon, perhaps one that once danced in a tree or curled in a seashell. It is on its journey, still riding the ocean's slow and graceful breath. Take a moment to imagine the Earth not as a blue marble from space, but as a giant time machine, a planet whose surface holds a memory of hundreds of millions of years. Beneath your feet lies a vast silent archive of carbon locked away in stone, slowly shifting and transforming over ages so long they make human history look like a blink. Tonight we're stepping off the shoreline and into the solid ground, tracing carbon's path through rock, mountains, magma, and time itself. This is carbon in the geosphere of the Earth's geological ledger, and it is one of the slowest, most patient movements in the entire carbon cycle. When we think of carbon, we often picture breath plants, oceans, and the air above, but the majority of Earth's carbon by far is not in the atmosphere of the ocean, or even in living things that's stored underground. Bound into rocks and sediments, scientists estimate that over 99% of the planet's carbon is held in the lithosphere, the rigid outer shell of the Earth. That a lot of carbon sitting quietly in places we rarely think about. Much of this carbon is in the form of sedimentary rocks. These are rocks formed from layers of material that have been compacted and cemented over time. Limestone, for example, is a sedimentary rock rich in calcium carbonate, a compound made from calcium carbon and oxygen. This limestone forms over millions of years from the shells and skeletons of tiny marine organisms that settle on the ocean floor. As these materials accumulate, they're pressed together, and the carbon within them is locked away. That carbon may remain trapped for tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years, slowly becoming part of the Earth's crust. Another familiar form of geological carbon is fossil fuels. Coal, oil, and natural gas are all made from ancient biological material, plants, plankton, and other organisms that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. When they died, they were buried under layers of sediment. Heat and pressure transformed them into black gold that fuels much of modern civilization. Coal is made mostly from ancient swamp plants. Oil and gas come from microscopic marine organisms that once floated in sunlit seas, and all of these carbon is a star, compressed, concentrated, and ready to release energy when burned. But let's go back even further in time. Picture a towering mountain range, its peaks dusted with snow, its cliffs etched with fossils. These mountains were not always so high. Many were once under the sea. Over geological time scales, tectonic forces pushed the Earth's plates together, raising the seafloor into mountains. When this happens, rocks containing carbon like limestone can be lifted from the depths to form part of the continental crust. If you see a fossil shell embedded in a mountaintop, you're looking at ancient carbon that had completed a vertical migration from ocean floor to highland. This slow movement of carbon through rock is known as a geological or slow carbon cycle. It's measured not in years, but in millions of years. It involves weathering, erosion, sedimentation, subduction, metamorphism, and volcanic release. It's not fast, it's not flashy, but it is fundamental to Earth's long-term climate stability. Let's start with weathering. This is a process by which rocks break down over time due to wind, rain, ice, and chemical reactions. When carbon dioxide in the air dissolves in rainwater, it forms a weak acid, carbonic acid. This slightly acidic rainwater falls onto rocks, especially silicate rocks, and reacts with the minerals inside. The chemical reactions remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bind it into new minerals. These reactions are incredibly slow, but they have a powerful cumulative effect over millions of years. Weathering can draw down large amount of carbon from the air and move it into the soil and rivers. Next, erosion carries the weather material now containing carbon into rivers, which eventually deliver to the ocean. There the carbon settles onto the seafloor. As part of sediments, this material can become sedimentary rock like shale or limestone, locking the carbon away for geological time. Some of it might be subducted, drawn into the Earth's mantle by tectonic activity. This happens at subduction zones, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another. As the plate sinks into hot interior of the Earth, the heat and pressure can cause the rocks to melt, releasing carbon dioxide. This brings us to volcanoes. Volcanic eruptions are one of few ways that geological carbon returns to the atmosphere. When magma rises to the surface, it brings with it gases from deep within the Earth. Carbon dioxide is one of the most common of these gases. Every volcanic plume contains carbon that has been trapped underground, sometimes for hundreds of millions of years. When a volcano erupts, it exhales carbon back into the sky, closing the loop of the slow carbon cycle. Compared to human emissions, volcanic carbon is modest. All the volcanoes on Earth combined emit less than 1% of the carbon dioxide that human activity releases each year, but over millions of years, volcanic activity has played a huge role in regulating Earth's climate. For example, during periods of intense volcanic activity, more CO2 enters the atmosphere, potentially leading to global warming. During quieter periods, of carbon input slows, and weathering can gradually draw down atmospheric CO2, leading to cooling. And even ice ages Let's pause and admire the balance here. The slow carbon cycle is a long-term thermostat. Weathering removes carbon dioxide and cools the planet. Volcanoes release it and warm. Things up the Earth naturally adjust, not quickly, but eventually this is how the planet has avoided becoming either a permanent snowball or a runaway greenhouse world over geological history. There have been dramatic shifts in atmospheric carbon and climate around 250 million years ago. At the end of the Permian period, massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released vast amounts of CO2. The result was runaway global warming and the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. More than 90% of marine species and 70% of land species disappeared. As a stark reminder that carbon held in rock, when released too quickly, can reshape the world. But carbon locked in stone is not just a threat, it's a record. By studying layers of sedimentary rock, scientists can reconstruct ancient atmospheres, track climate shifts, and understand the rhythms of carbon over deep time. They use isotopes of carbon to analyze how much biological activity was happening in the past, how much volcanic activity was going on, and what the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide looked like millions of years ago. Some rocks even serve as carbon collectors today. Certain types of ultramafic rocks rich in magnesium and iron can react with atmospheric CO2 to form solid carbonate minerals. This process, called mineral carbonation, is slow, but permanent. Scientists are studying ways to speed it up and use it as a form of carbon capture and storage. The idea is to take excess CO2 from the atmosphere and lock it into rock, mimicking what the Earth already does, but on a faster time scale. This brings us to human interaction with geological carbon. In the last 2 centuries, we've dug up and burned an enormous amount of fossil carbon that had been quietly buried and locked away. In doing so, we've rapidly transferred geological carbon into the atmosphere. What nature did slowly over millions of years, we've undone in just a few generations. It's like emptying a savings account in a weekend that took eons to build. And yet the rocks remain beneath our cities, our mountains, our fields. Lies a silent network of carbon history. Every layer tells a story. Some record ancient oceans, others ancient forests, and still others a slow drip of calcium carbonate forming stalactites. In a cave, these rocks whisper of ice ages and heat waves, extinctions, and bloom silence and eruption. They are the Earth's memory, and carbon is the ink with which that memory is written. So, the next time you hold a pebble or walk on a stone path or see cliffs rising above a valley, remember you are surrounded by carbon, not the lively carbon of breath and leaf, but the old slow carbon of mountain and magma. It is the calmest part of the cycle, but perhaps the most enduring. And though it doesn't move quickly, it matters, because the stone beneath your feet is not just solid, it is storied. It is part of a conversation that spans not just centuries, but the entire age of Earth. A conversation spoken in minerals and sealed in silence. Carbon in the rocks waits, patient, quiet, eternal. Picture the sun rising on a clear spring morning. Trees stretch, open their leaves, flowers tilt their heads toward the light. A soft breeze carries a scent of new growth, and somewhere in the soil roots are waking up from their winter slumber. Above the ground things look peaceful, but within every leaf, every blade of grass, and every green thing reaching toward the sky, a quiet miracle is taking place. Photosynthesis. Tonight, we're going to gently explore one of the most important processes in the entire carbon cycle, and perhaps one of the most beautiful: how plants with nothing more than sunlight, water, and air capture carbon and build the very fabric of life. Let's begin with the basics. Photosynthesis is the process by which green plants, algae, and some bacteria use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose, a type of sugar, and oxygen. That may sound simple, but this single process powers nearly all life on Earth. Without it, there will be no forest, no food, no breathable air, and no snoring cats on sunlit windowsills. At the heart of photosynthesis is a green pigment called chlorophyll you can think of. Chlorophyll is nature's solar panel. It sits inside the chloroplast of plant cells and captures energy from sunlight. When sunlight hits a leaf, chlorophyll absorbs certain wavelengths of light, mostly in the blue and red parts of the spectrum. Green light, interestingly, is mostly reflected, which is why plants appear green to our eyes. So the green we see is actually the part of the light spectrum that plants are politely declining once sunlight is absorbed. The magic begins. Water absorbed from the soil travels up to the plant's roots and stems, eventually reaching the leaves. Carbon dioxide enters the leaves through tiny openings called stomata. These microscopic pores can open and close to regulate gas exchange, allowing carbon dioxide in and oxygen out. Picture them as tiny mouths. Taking a sip of carbon from the atmosphere inside the leaf, sunlight energy is used to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is released as a byproduct. Lucky for us, as that's the air we breathe. The hydrogen is then combined with the carbon dioxide to form glucose, a simple sugar that serves as the building block for more complex carbohydrates. This sugar becomes the energy currency of the plant, fueling its growth, repair, and reproduction. The overall reaction looks something like this: 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water in the presence of sunlight produce 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. But let's not get too tangled in equations. What matters is this carbon dioxide from the air is being transformed into something solid, something sweet, something alive. Photosynthesis is more than just a way for plants to make lunch. It is a foundational engine that drives the biosphere. All animals, including humans, rely on it directly or indirectly for food. Herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores, and omnivores like us enjoy a bit of both. Every calorie we consume began with a photon of sunlight caught by chlorophyll and photosynthesis. Doesn't stop at sugar. Plants use those sugars to create cellulose for their cell walls, starch for energy storage, and other organic compounds like oils and proteins. That apple on your table, the grain in your bread, the cotton in your clothes, all were made possible by photosynthesis. But the importance of this process goes beyond food. It is also one of the most significant carbon sinks on the planet. Every time a plant photosynthesizes, it pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it in solid form. Some of this carbon is stored in leaves and stems, some in roots, some in fruits and seeds. A tree, for example, is a magnificent reservoir of atmospheric carbon. It can hold hundreds of kg of carbon, and it's with leaves and roots and forests collectively store billions of tons of carbon worldwide. Even grasses and wildflowers, though smaller, play their part. Prairie grasses have deep root systems that can store carbon in the soil for years. Wetlands and mangroves are especially efficient, capturing carbon quickly and burying oxygen. Poor soils where decomposition slows, allowing the carbon to remain trapped for centuries. Now, photosynthesis has 2 main phases, often described in more technical terms as the light-dependent reactions in the Calvin cycle, also known as the light-independent reactions. Let's ease into them gently. The light-dependent reactions occur in the phyloid membranes within the chloroplast. These reactions need sunlight directly. Here, energy from the sun is used to split water molecules into oxygen protons and electrons. The oxygen is released, and the energy harvested in this phase is stored in 2 molecules called ADP and NADPH. You can think of these molecules as charged batteries full of the energy needed for the next step. The second phase, the Calvin cycle, takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. This phase doesn't require sunlight directly, which is why it's sometimes called the dark reaction, though it can and does occur during the day. Using the ADP and NADPH from the first phase, the plant takes in carbon dioxide and assembles it into glucose. This part is like a molecular assembly line, carefully adding carbon atoms together 1 step at a time. The whole process is elegant, efficient, and endlessly repeated, leaf by leaf, day by day. All across the world, it's happening right now, outside your window, in the grass and the trees, and the algae floating in ponds and rivers. And it's not limited to land and the ocean. Tiny phytoplankton are doing the same thing. These microscopic plants form the base of the marine food web and collectively perform nearly half of all photosynthesis on Earth. Half. That means roughly every other breath you take is thanks to a plant you cannot see drifting silently in the sea. But photosynthesis is not just a background process. It also plays a central role in regulating Earth's climate by drawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Plants help control the planet's temperature. The more photosynthesis happening, the more carbon is locked away in biomass. and the less remains in the atmosphere to trap heat. This balance is delicate when forests are cut down, especially tropical rainforests. The amount of photosynthesis drops, fewer trees mean less carbon is captured. Worse still, when those trees are burned or left to decay, the carbon they stored is released back into the air. This is why deforestation is a major contributor to climate change. On the flip side, planting trees and restoring ecosystems can help tip the balance back. Reforestation and afforestation projects aim to increase photosynthesis, remove more carbon from the air, and store it in living tissue. Even urban gardens, green roofs, and tree-lined streets make a difference. Every leaf counts, and plants don't just capture carbon, they share it. Through their roots, many plants engage in complex underground exchanges with fungi, especially a group called mycorrhizal fungi. These fungi form partnerships with roots, helping plants absorb nutrients and water. In return, the plants provide the fungi with sugars, carbon-based molecules made through photosynthesis. It's a trade that's been happening for over 400 million years. Some scientists even describe this relationship as a kind of biological internet, with carbon and information flowing through the soil like signals through wires. The entire planet hums with photosynthesis. In deserts, tiny bursts of green spring up after rain, performing their short-lived song of carbon capture before drying out again. In temperate zones, photosynthesis rises and falls with the seasons, peaking in summer and slowing in winter. Satellites can even detect this rhythm from space. Every year, the northern hemisphere greens up in spring and summer, pulling down vast amounts of carbon, then browns in autumn, releasing. Again, it's Earth's breath seen from orbit. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, know that somewhere a leaf is opening, a tree is pulling in carbon, a blade of grass is storing sunlight, the atmosphere is being gently combed, a carbon dioxide molecule by a quiet process that has sustained life for over 3 billion years. Photosynthesis is not loud or fast, it doesn't spark or roar, but it is one of the most important stories on this planet. It is the reason there's oxygen in the air, food on our plates, and color in the world. It is the slow magic of light becoming life, and all of it begins with carbon, water, and a bit of sunshine. Imagine walking through a quiet autumn forest. The leaves are golden and crisp, and the air smells of earth, and with smoke you crunch along the path, and somewhere in the background a bird calls out as if to say, yes, things are changing. And indeed, there are leaves that were once busy with photosynthesis now fall to the ground. Trees, grasses, and flowers shift from growth to rest. But the carbon that gave them shape doesn't vanish. It's simply beginning the next part of its journey tonight. We're following carbon as it exits the living world through respiration and decomposition, two of the most essential yet often overlooked steps in the great carbon cycle. Let's start with respiration. You're doing it right now, probably without even noticing. Every breath you take and brings oxygen into your lungs. Every breath out carries a bit of carbon dioxide away. But respiration goes far beyond just breathing. At its core, respiration is how living organisms convert stored energy into usable fuel. It's a bit like a campfire inside your cells, burning glucose to keep everything going. Plants, animals, fungi, and even bacteria all perform cellular respiration in humans and other animals. This happens inside tiny structures in our cells called mitochondria, often called the powerhouses of a cell. These little organelles take glucose, which contains carbon, and break it down using oxygen. The result, energy in the form of a molecule called ADP plus water and carbon dioxide. As byproducts, the overall chemical reaction is essentially the reverse of photosynthesis. While photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide and water to create glucose and oxygen, respiration takes that glucose and oxygen and turns it back into carbon dioxide and water. It's a perfect loop. You can almost hear nature whisper, nothing wasted. Now think about this. Every heartbeat, every blink, every quiet thought drifting through your mind right now is powered by respiration. Your cells are busily breaking down sugars, releasing carbon dioxide that will soon leave your body with your next exhale. You are quite literally breathing out carbon that was once part of your lunch or your last snack or that cup of tea you had earlier. You are a carbon processor, gently moving atoms from one form to another. Day and night, plants do it too, though we often think of them as carbon absorbers. They also respire, especially at night. When there's no sunlight for photosynthesis during the day, plants usually absorb more carbon dioxide than they release, which makes them a net carbon sink. But at night, they breathe out small amounts of CO2 as they use up stored sugars to fuel their cells, so respiration is happening everywhere all the time in your dog, your house plants, the moss on a stone, and the bacteria in your gut. It's one of the main ways that carbon is returned to the atmosphere from living things. But it's not the only way. There's another route, slower, smellier, and equally important: decomposition. Let's return to that autumn. Forests, as leaves fall, they pile up on the ground at first. They seem to just sit there, but look closer, much closer, those leaves are alive with activity. Worms wriggle through them, fungi thread their way across the surface, bacteria begin to break down the cellulose and sugars within. Bit by bit, molecule by molecule, the leaves are dismantled, and with each step carbon is released. Decomposition is nature's recycling program. When a plant or animal dies, its body begins to break down microbes, and fungi feed on the remains using enzymes to digest complex organic molecules. As they do, they respire too, releasing carbon dioxide or methane into the air, depending on how much oxygen is present. If the environment is rich in oxygen, like a forest floor, decomposition tends to release carbon dioxide. But in places where oxygen is limited, such as swamps, wetlands, or landfills, decomposition can produce methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Methane, or CH4, contains 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. It's released by certain tiny ancient microorganisms that thrive in oxygen-poor conditions: termite guts, cow stomachs, rice paddies, and even melting permafrost, all host microbes that produce methane as they break down organic material. This part of the cycle may not be glamorous, but it is essential. Without decomposition, the world would be buried in the remains of previous generations. Carbon would be locked away in dead things, unable to return to the air or soil. Nothing new could grow instead. Decomposition ensures that carbon is released, made available once again for plants, microbes, and ecosystems to use. And it's not just carbon that returns to the environment. Decomposition releases nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, elements that plants need to grow the decaying matter, enriches the soil, making it fertile and full of life. That rich, dark smell of forest soil after rain, that's the scent of decomposition. It may be earthy and pungent, but it's also the smell of renewal. Beneath the surface, deeper into the soil, other forms of decomposition take place more slowly in oxygen. Poor conditions, organic matter can accumulate rather than decay over centuries and millennia. This buildup can form peat, dense carbonate material found in bogs and wetlands. Petlands cover just a small fraction of the Earth's surface, but store more carbon than all the world's forests combined. When left undisturbed, they are excellent long-term carbon sinks, but when drained or burned, they release massive amounts of carbon dioxide and methane. Even the ocean has its own version of decomposition. When marine organisms die, they sink toward the seafloor. Along the way, their bodies are consumed by scavengers and microbes. Most of the carbon is recycled in the upper layers of the ocean, but a small amount reaches the deep sea, where decomposition slows dramatically. In some cases, organic material becomes buried by sediment and preserved over time. It may even turn into oil or gas, becoming part of the geological carbon cycle. In recent years, scientists have started to appreciate the role that soil microbes play in the global carbon budget. Healthy soils teeming with bacteria and fungi are vital for carbon storage. They help process organic matter, stabilize carbon compounds, and keep nutrients cycling through ecosystems. Farming practices that disturb soil, like plowing and excessive use of fertilizers, can disrupt this balance, causing soils to lose carbon. Conversely, techniques like cover cropping, composting, and reduced tillage can help soils store more carbon over time. So respiration and decomposition are two sides of the same carbon coin. One is fast, cellular, and ongoing, taking place in every breath and blink. The other is slower, messier, and often hidden from view, working through decay, digestion, and microbial life. But both are part of the same gentle rhythm, returning carbon to the atmosphere so that it can begin its journey. Again, these processes also remind us that carbon is never really lost, or gained. It only changes form. The carbon in your body today might have once been in a tree or a loaf of bread or a dinosaur or a puff of ancient air. Eventually, it will be released to drift and settle and be taken up again. In that way, we're all part of the same breath, the same exhale. So as you lie in bed breathing, softly think of the carbon that's moving through you right now. It's working your cells, powering your thoughts, keeping your heart steady. Later you will exhale it may be taken up by a blade of grass or a towering tree or a drifting plankton. And one day long from now it may return to the earth to be broken down, reshaped, and used again. Respiration and decomposition aren't glamorous, but they're vital. They keep the carbon cycle turning, keep ecosystems thriving, and connect every living thing to every other. They're the quiet exhale after the inhale, the soft letting go that makes space for something new. Carbon doesn't stay still, it moves, and as it moves, it weaves all life together in breath and soil and time. Imagine Earth not as a static place, but as a planet in motion, constantly shifting, pulsing, breathing in waves that unfold so slowly we don't usually notice. Beneath your feet, continents drift, mountains rise, rivers carve valleys, volcanoes smolder and erupt in this great ancient theater. Carbon plays a surprisingly patient role. It journeys through rock, ocean, and sky in a cycle so slow it takes hundreds of thousands to millions of years to complete. Tonight we're going to gently descend into the world of the slow carbon cycle, process that doesn't care about the rush of seasons or the tick of the human clock. This is a story of carbon's long game, where change is measured not in moments, but in millennia. The slow carbon cycle is like the deep undercurrent beneath the surface of a calm lake. You can't see it, but it's always moving. It's responsible for regulating Earth's climate over geological time scales, balancing the planet's carbon budget through a series of steps involving rocks, minerals, tectonic plates, and time itself. While the fast carbon cycle, made up of breathing, photosynthesis, and decay, circulates carbon on time scales of days to years, the slow carbon cycle takes its time, operating on scales of hundreds of thousands to millions of years. It is deliberate, it is steady, and it is absolutely essential to understand how this works. Let's start with carbon dioxide. In the atmosphere, rainwater absorbs some CO2, forming a weak acid called carbonic acid. It's not dangerous, no need to worry when you walk through rain, but it's enough to start breaking down rocks through a process called chemical weathering. When the slightly acidic water flows over silica rocks, it reacts with the minerals inside, pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and locking it into new mineral forms like bicarbonates. This is the Earth's natural way of scrubbing carbon dioxide from the sky. It's a bit like a planetary sponge, absorbing excess carbon and transforming it drop by drop. This weathering process happens most efficiently in warm, wet climates, where rain is plentiful and biological activity stirs up the soil. Over thousands of years, the weathered minerals are carried by rivers into the ocean, where the carbon can remain dissolved or be used by marine organisms to build shells and skeletons. Tiny plankton, corals, and shellfish incorporate the carbon into calcium carbonate structures. When they die, they remain settle on the seafloor slowly, building up layers of sediment. Over millions of years, these sediments become compacted and turn into limestone and other types of carbonary rock. It's here that carbon is locked away in one of the Earth's longest-term storage systems. Some of the carbon in these rocks has been sitting quietly for hundreds of millions of years, unmoved, undisturbed, waiting. But carbon doesn't stay buried forever. The Earth's crust is restless. Through the process of plate tectonics, the ocean floor gradually moves. In some places, it is pushed beneath continental plates in zones called subduction zones. As the carbon-rich rocks descend into the mantle, they experience intense heat and pressure. This causes some of the minerals to melt and release carbon dioxide gas. Eventually, that carbon finds its way back to the surface through volcanic eruptions. Picture a volcano smoldering gently or erupting dramatically, sending ash and gas into the sky. That plume contains carbon that may have been part of a coral reef hundreds of millions of years ago. Now it is returning to the atmosphere, completing a cycle that began with rainfall on a stone and ended with fire from the Earth's core. It's a poetic loop, a slow exhale from the depths of the planet. This entire cycle, from the weathering of rock to the deposition of sediments to subduction, and volcanic release takes place over very long time scales. The average journey for a single carbon atom through the slow carbon cycle might last between 100,000 to 200 million years. It's a cycle so drawn out that it can only be seen when looking at the Earth's history through the lens of deep time. Why does this matter? Because the slow carbon cycle acts as Earth's thermostat. It regulates the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which in turn influences global temperatures. When weathering increases, say because of mountain building or more rainfall, more carbon is pulled out of the air, leading to cooler global temperatures. When volcanic activity increases, more carbon dioxide is added to the air, warming the planet. Over millions of years, this cycle helps keep Earth's climate relatively stable, preventing extremes like a permanent ice house or a runaway greenhouse. Let's take a quick journey back in time to see this in action. Around 55 million years ago, a sudden spike in atmospheric carbon dioxide caused a dramatic warming event known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PTM. During this time, global temperatures rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, the oceans acidified, and many deep-sea species went extinct. Scientists believe the carbon may have come from massive volcanic activity or the release of methane from seafloor deposits. But here's the remarkable part: over the next few hundred years, the slow carbon cycle worked to pull that carbon back out of the atmosphere. Chemical weathering, increased sediments were deposited, and temperatures eventually returned to a more stable range. It took time, a lot of time, but the planet adjusted. In a more recent chapter, we find the story of Earth's ice ages. These periodic glaciations are closely tied to changes in the planet's orbit, but also to shift in atmospheric carbon dioxide during glacial periods. See, O2 levels were lower and temperatures dropped during interglacial periods like the one we're now. See, O2 levels rose and the planet warmed again. The slow carbon cycle played a key role in balancing the system, adjusting CO2 levels through rock weathering and ocean chemistry over tens of thousands of years. Even mountain building affects the carbon cycle. When tectonic plates collide and raise up mountain ranges, they expose fresh rock to the atmosphere. More exposed rock means more weathering, which draws down more carbon dioxide. The rise of the Himalayas, for example, has been linked to long-term cooling trends over the past 50 million years. Due to increased weathering rates, the very mountains that touch the sky are part of the carbon story, slowly altering the composition of the air above them. Of course, the slow carbon cycle is not immune to disruption. Human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, has released vast amounts of carbon into the atmosphere in a very short time. What took hundreds of millions of years to store underground has been released in just a few centuries. This rapid addition of carbon dioxide has outpaced the ability of the slow carbon cycle to respond. Weathering, sedimentation, and volcanic release all operate on geological time scales. They cannot keep up with the speed of industrial emissions. Still, understanding the slow carbon cycle gives us perspective. It reminds us that Earth has its own mechanisms for restoring balance, though they work on a timeline far beyond human lifespans. It also inspires new ideas. Scientists are now exploring ways to harness aspects of the slow carbon cycle to help address climate change. For example, enhanced rock weathering involves spreading finely ground silicate rocks on agricultural fields. These rocks react with rainwater and atmospheric carbon dioxide, accelerating the natural weathering process and helping remove CO2 from the air. There are also proposals to capture carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere and store it underground in rock formations, effectively creating an artificial version of long-term geological storage. While these technologies are still developing, they reflect a deepening appreciation for the wisdom of Earth's own systems. As we drift back into the present moment, think about the ground beneath you. It may look solid and still, but it is part of a vast, slow-moving machine. Every stone, every hill, every grain of sand was once something else: an ocean floor, volcano, sediment drifting down to the sea. And within those rocks, carbon lies quietly waiting for its next chapter. You too are part of that story. The carbon in your body may one day become part of a tree or shell or even a pebble beneath someone else's feet. The slow carbon cycle reminds us that life is not a straight Line it as a spiral, a loop, a dance between atmosphere and earth, breath, and stone. So the next time you pick up a rock, hold it for a moment, feel its weight, and know that it carries a story far older than memory. And somewhere inside it, a carbon atom rests an ancient traveler in a very slow race, waiting for its turn to rise again. Let's return now from the realm of deep time and rising mountains to something more familiar, the everyday rhythm of seasons, storms, and shifting sunlight. The carbon cycle, as we've seen, moves through both fast and slow lanes. The slow carbon cycle takes hundreds of thousands to millions of years to complete its sweeping journey through rocks, volcanoes, and the deep ocean. But there's also a much quicker route, one that hums all around us with the pace of days, months, and years. This is the fast carbon cycle, and tonight we'll follow its loops. Through forests and fields, through wind and weather, through soil and rain, it is Earth's living breath, responding to the changing seasons, adjusting to sunlight and temperature, and reminding us that carbon is never truly still. The fast carbon cycle is powered by life plants taking carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, locking that carbon into sugars and starches. Animals eat the plants, releasing carbon dioxide back through respiration. Microbes break down dead matter, sending more carbon into the atmosphere or into the soil. These processes are familiar now, but what makes them especially fascinating is how they speed up, slow down, and shift with the planet's natural rhythms. Let's begin with the seasons of the Northern Hemisphere, which contains most of the world's landmass and vegetation. Spring is a time of great carbon absorption. As temperatures warm and daylight increases, plants come alive, trees leaf out, grasses grow thick, crops sprout from fields during this burst of growth. Photosynthesis outpaces respiration, and vast amounts of carbon dioxide are drawn from the atmosphere. This causes atmospheric CO2 levels to drop slightly during spring and summer. But come autumn, the pattern reverses. Leaves fall, plants die back, decomposition picks up, and carbon returns to the air. Respiration and decay once again exceed photosynthesis, and atmospheric CO2 begins to rise. By winter, much of the photosynthetic machinery is asleep, and carbon dioxide builds up in the atmosphere waiting for the next spring. The seasonal breathing of the planet is not poetic metaphor. It's measurable. Scientists track it using precise instruments, including the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which has recorded atmospheric carbon dioxide levels since the late 1950s. The resulting graph, known as the Keeling curve, shows a clear upward trend in global CO2, but it also reveals a distinct regular oscillation every year. The line rises and falls like a heartbeat, echoing the planet's seasonal inhale and exhale. It's easy to imagine the world's forests and fields as giant green lungs, drawing carbon during the warm, bright months and releasing it again as things grow quiet and cold. This natural pulse is strongest in the Northern Hemisphere due to its vast forests and agricultural lands. In the Southern Hemisphere, where there's more ocean and less land, the seasonal signal is smaller, but still present. But seasons are not the only players in the fast carbon cycle. Weather events like storms, droughts, and heat waves can all influence the movement of carbon between land, air, and sea. For example, during a drought, plants may close their stomata to conserve water, which also limits the amount of carbon dioxide they can absorb. Growth slows, and less carbon is taken out of the atmosphere. Conversely, after a period of heavy rainfall, plant growth may surge, drawing down more carbon. Forest fires, often intensified by dry conditions, release massive amounts of stored carbon back into the air in the form of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and even black carbon or soot. These fires also transform the landscape, killing trees that once absorbed CO2 and leaving behind charred ground that may take years or decades to fully recover. Soils are another key player in the fast carbon cycle. They're not just dirt, but living ecosystems teeming with bacteria, fungi, worms, and countless other organisms. These tiny creatures help decompose plant and animal remains, recycling nutrients and carbon in the process. In healthy soils, carbon is stored in the form of organic matter, tiny fragments of roots, leaves, and microbial life that slowly break down and become part of the soil structure. When soils are undisturbed and rich in organic material, they can store a large amount of carbon for decades, or even centuries. This is especially true in forest grasslands and wetlands, where plant roots help keep the soil intact and living organisms help process carbon in balanced ways. But when soils are disturbed through deforestation, overgrazing, or intensive farming, they can lose much of their carbon. Plowing, for example, exposes buried organic matter to oxygen, speeding up decomposition and releasing carbon dioxide. Erosion washes carbon-rich topsoil into rivers and oceans. In this way, soils can shift from carbon sinks to carbon sources. Agriculture plays a powerful role in this dynamic. Some farming methods like monoculture planting and heavy tillage can degrade soil and release carbon, but other practices like cover cropping, oil farming, composting, and agroforestry can help rebuild soil carbon, creating more resilient landscapes and drawing carbon out of the atmosphere. These approaches are part of what's called climate-smart agriculture, and they highlight the close relationship between human activity and the fast carbon cycle. Then there are the wetlands, marshes, peatlands, and mangrove forests, some of the most efficient carbon storing ecosystems on the planet. In these waterlogged environments, decomposition is slow due to the low oxygen levels, allowing organic matter to accumulate over time. The result is thick carbon-rich soil that can hold on to carbon for thousands of years. But like all ecosystems, wetlands are sensitive. When drained or developed, they can release their stored carbon quickly, often in the form of both carbon dioxide and methane. The ocean too participates in the fast carbon cycle, not just through deep currents and slow sedimentation, but through surface exchanges and biological activity. As we've discussed before, carbon dioxide dissolves into ocean water at the surface. Especially in cooler regions, there it can be used by phytoplankton for photosynthesis, forming the base of the marine food web. These plankton blooms are seasonal, peaking in spring and early summer, when sunlight and nutrients are abundant. As the plankton grow, they absorb large amount of carbon from the surface ocean. When they die or are eaten, the carbon can be transferred to larger animals, recycled by bacteria, or fall as marine snow to deeper waters. While much of this carbon is part of the slower biological pump, some is quickly recycled near the surface, contributing to the fast cycling of carbon between ocean and air. Even storms affect this exchange. A powerful hurricane can churn the ocean surface, disrupting stratification and bringing deeper carbon-rich waters to the surface. This can temporarily increase carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. Alternatively, storm-driven mixing can also enhance nutrient availability, leading to new plankton growth and carbon uptake. It all depends on the context, and like so much of Earth's system, it's about balance. Forests are perhaps the most visible part of the fast carbon cycle. A single tree may not seem like much, but a mature forest, especially a tropical rainforest, can store incredible amounts of carbon in its trunks, branches, leaves, and soil. These forests are often referred to as carbon sinks because they absorb more carbon than they release, helping to offset emissions from other sources. But forests are also vulnerable. Logging, fire, pests, and climate stress can all reduce their ability to take up carbon. In some cases, forests may even become net emitters of carbon, especially if they are repeatedly disturbed or not allowed to regrow. Protecting and restoring forests is one of the most immediate ways we can support the fast carbon cycle and stabilize global carbon levels. Urban areas are part of this cycle too, though in more complex ways. Cities are often seen as carbon sources, places where fossil fuels are burned for energy, transportation, and industry. But cities also contain green spaces, gardens, and parks that absorb carbon, and buildings and infrastructure that can store it in durable forms. Urban forests, rooftop gardens, and tree-lined streets all contribute to the fast carbon cycle, helping to bring balance. Even in concrete jungles, it's important to remember that the fast carbon cycle doesn't operate in isolation. It interacts constantly with the slow carbon cycle and with human actions. A forest that absorbs carbon now may in 1,000 years be buried and become coal. A volcanic eruption may release carbon that has been stored for 100 million years, entering the fast cycle in an instant. And so the carbon flows quick and quiet from root to sky from breath to breeze, from soil to leaf, and back again. The fast carbon cycle is the rhythm of everyday life, responsive, dynamic, and ever-changing. It is how the earth breathes in time with its seasons, how it responds to storm and sunlight, drought and bloom. It is the dance of carbon in its most fluid form, shaping the world we see and the air we share as you rest tonight. Think of the trees swaying gently, the soil teeming with life, the oceans glinting under moonlight. All around you, carbon is on the move, fast, fleeting, and full of purpose. It hums in the breath of animals, the stir of roots, the fall of rain. It waits and leaves, lingers in clouds, and carries the memory of the sun. Carbon in the fast cycle is not just a chemical process, it is the tempo of life itself, swift, cyclical, and endlessly turning. Imagine waking up early on a crisp morning and stepping outside. The sky is clear, the sun is rising, and the air is cool, and still you take a deep breath. And though you can't see it or taste it, that breath contains more than just oxygen floating in an invisible blend of gases. It is carbon dioxide, tiny weightless molecules that have far more influence than their size. Might suggest some of it may have been exhaled by a tree or a nearby squirrel, or even a volcano halfway around the world over. Time, this thin veil of gas, has helped shape our climate, acting like a thermostat that adjusts slowly but persistently. And tonight we're going to explore how the carbon cycle helps shape the Earth's climate, how carbon in the air is not just passive, but powerful. Let's begin with the basics. The Earth's climate system is driven by the sun. Solar energy reaches our planet in the form of light, and heat. Some of that energy is reflected back into space by clouds, ice, and bright surfaces. The rest is absorbed by land, water, and the atmosphere, warming the planet to stay in balance. Earth must radiate that absorbed energy back out into space as infrared radiation, basically heat, but not all of that outgoing energy makes it. Certain gases in the atmosphere trap some of this infrared radiation and send it back toward the surface, warming the lower atmosphere. This is the greenhouse effect now, before that term brings up any alarms. Let's be clear, the greenhouse effect is not a bad thing. In fact, without it, life as we know it wouldn't exist. Without greenhouse gases, the Earth's average surface temperature would be well below freezing, more like a deep space outpost in the cozy blue planet we call home. The problem isn't that the greenhouse effect exists. The problem arises when it becomes too strong, when the balance is tipped and the atmosphere traps more heat than is healthy for ecosystems, oceans, and the rhythms of life. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is one of the most important greenhouse gases. It's not. The most powerful, methane and nitrous oxide, have stronger heat-trapping abilities per molecule, but carbon dioxide is far more abundant and long-lived. Once released, it can stay in the atmosphere for hundreds to even thousands of years. This means that the carbon dioxide we emit today will continue to influence Earth's climate far into the future. So where does carbon dioxide come from? As we've seen in previous chapters, it comes from respiration, decomposition, volcanic activity, and the burning of fossil fuels. It's also released from land use changes like deforestation and from some industrial processes such as cement production. All of these sources add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, where it mixes evenly and begins to trap more heat. Carbon dioxide doesn't work alone. It's part of a complex web of climate feedbacks. One of the most important is the water vapor feedback. As carbon dioxide levels rise and the atmosphere warms, more water evaporates into the air. Water vapor is itself a potent greenhouse gas, so this additional moisture amplifies the warming effect. It's a bit like adding another layer to an already thick blanket. There are also feedbacks involving ice and snow. As the planet warms, ice melts ice, and snow reflects sunlight back into space. But when they disappear, darker surfaces like water and soil are exposed. These darker surfaces absorb more heat, leading to more warming and more melting. This is known as a positive feedback loop, and it's one of the reasons the Arctic is warming faster than other parts of the world. Carbon dioxide also interacts with the ocean in ways that affect climate. The ocean absorbs about 1/4 of the carbon dioxide we emit each year, acting as a buffer against even faster warming. But this buffering comes with limits. As ocean temperatures rise, their ability to absorb carbon dioxide decreases. Warm water holds less gas, just like a warm soda loses its fizz. faster, so as the planet heats up, the oceans may become less effective at pulling carbon out of the air. Even more complex are the interactions with plants. In a warmer world, some plants may grow faster and absorb more carbon, which can help offset emissions. This is called the carbon fertilization effect. But it's not a guarantee. Higher temperatures can also stress plants, dry out soils, and lead to more wildfires, which release stored carbon back into the air. Whether vegetation becomes a bigger carbon sink or a source depends on many factors, including water availability, nutrient levels, and how ecosystems adapt. Over Earth's history, changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide have closely tracked changes in global temperature. Ice core records from Antarctica show this clearly. During ice ages, carbon dioxide levels were lower, and the planet was cooler. During interglacial periods like the one we're living in now, carbon dioxide levels were higher, and the climate was warmer. These natural variations were driven by changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, which altered how sunlight was distributed across the planet. But carbon dioxide acted as an amplifier, turning small changes in solar energy into larger changes in temperature today. However, the rise in carbon dioxide is not being driven by natural cycles. It's being driven by human activity. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s, atmospheric carbon dioxide has increased from about 280 parts per million to over 420 parts per million. That had jumped about 50% in just over 2 centuries. A blink in geological time. The last time atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were this high was more than 3 million years ago during the Pliocene epoch, when sea levels were tens of meters higher and the climate was significantly warmer. This rapid rise in CO2 has had a noticeable impact. Global average temperatures have increased by more than 1 degree Celsius since the late 19th century. That may not sound like much, but it's already changing weather patterns, melting glaciers, intensifying storms, and raising sea levels. If emissions continue unchecked, scientists project that temperatures could rise by 2, 3, or even 4 degrees Celsius over the next century. The consequences of such warming will be widespread, affecting agriculture, biodiversity, water availability, and human health. But while the effects of carbon dioxide on climate are serious, there's also hope in understanding the carbon cycle. Because carbon moves between the atmosphere, oceans, land, and rocks, we have opportunities to influence where it goes and how much of it stays in the air. By reducing emissions, protecting forests, improving soil health, and exploring ways to capture and store carbon, we can help stabilize the climate and reduce the risks of future warming. One of the most promising approaches is reforestation, planting new trees and restoring degraded ecosystems. Trees are natural carbon sinks. As they grow, they absorb carbon dioxide and store it in their trunks, branches, and roots. A single mature tree can absorb around 22 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. Multiply that by millions or billions, and forests become powerful allies in the fight against climate change. Another approach is regenerative agriculture. By improving farming techniques to enhance soil health, farmers can increase the amount of carbon stored in soil. Organic matter practices like cover cropping, composting, and reduce tillage not only draw down carbon, but also improve crop yields, water retention, and biodiversity. Then there's carbon capture and storage technologies designed to remove carbon dioxide from industrial emissions or directly from the air and store it underground in geological formations. These approaches are still developing, and they face technical and economic challenges, but they represent another way to work with the carbon cycle rather than against it. It's worth noting that not all carbon dioxide removal is created equal. Some methods offer temporary storage, like planting crops that are later harvested, while others aim for permanence, such as turning carbon into rock through mineralization. Understanding these differences is key to building effective climate strategies. Ultimately, carbon dioxide's role in shaping climate is about balance. The Earth is always at carbon in its atmosphere. The key is how much and how quickly it changes. Too little and the planet freezes too much, and it overheats. The carbon cycle in its natural form help keep Earth's climate stable for millions of years. Our challenge now is to bring that balance back. gently and thoughtfully as you lie back and drift off tonight. Think of the air around you seems empty, but it carries the breath of forests, oceans, and ancient volcanoes. It holds carbon from meals long past, from fires burned from mountains worn down by rain. That carbon affects the warmth of the air, the flow of clouds, the patterns of wind and rain. And yet it is still part of a cycle, one we are learning to understand, to respect, and to guide with care. Carbon shapes the climate, yes, but understanding. Carbon gives us the power to shape the future, and that, like a steady breath on a still morning, is a hopeful thought to hold on to. Imagine if you were standing in a place that's quiet, still, and entirely white snow stretches out in every direction. The ground beneath your feet is thick with ice layered over thousands of years. The wind is soft but cold, and nothing seems to move except the occasional swirl of drifting powder. You're in the midst of an ice age, one of the many frozen chapters in Earth's long climate story. Now imagine the same place millions of years later. No snow, no ice, just warm air, green vegetation, and rivers of melt water cutting through a rich and vibrant landscape. These alternating scenes, ice and warm frozen silence, and living but have repeated many times in the history of our planet. And in the middle of all this change, guiding the climate from one extreme to another, is carbon. Tonight, we're diving deep into how carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases interact with Earth's climate system over geological time, not just by changing things directly, but by amplifying them. These interactions are known as feedback loops. Some stabilize the system, keeping things within a certain range. Others intensify change, nudging the climate further in one direction. Carbon, though small and invisible in its gaseous form, is deeply entangled in both types. Let's begin with a basic truth. Earth's climate is not fixed. It has changed many times, from the icy expanses of glacial periods to the balmy tropical warmth of interglacials. These shifts are driven in part by what scientists call Milankovitch cycles, named after a Serbian astronomer. These cycles describe regular changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, which affect how sunlight is distributed across the planet over tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. These orbital wobbles influence the timing and intensity of the seasons. But, and this is key, on their own, these changes in sunlight are not enough to fully explain the dramatic shifts in temperature and ice cover that have occurred throughout Earth's history. This is where carbon dioxide comes in. When Earth receives slightly more sunlight in the northern hemisphere due to orbital changes, it begins to warm. This small warming melts some ice and warms the oceans, which in turn release carbon dioxide that was previously stored in cold water. That extra carbon dioxide then amplifies the initial warming by enhancing the greenhouse effect. More heat is trapped in the atmosphere, leading to more ice melt, more carbon release, and more warming. This is an example of positive feedback loop. The same loop works in reverse. During cooling phases, when sunlight decreases due to orbital shifts, temperatures begin to fall. Colder oceans absorb more carbon dioxide, drawing it out of the atmosphere. With less carbon dioxide, the greenhouse effect weakens, and the planet cools. Furthermore, snow and ice form, increasing the amount of sunlight reflected away from the planet. And so the cooling intensifies. This interplay between sunlight, carbon dioxide, and ice cover has driven the rhythm of Earth's ice ages for the past 2.5 million years. Ice cores drilled from Antarctica and Greenland tell this story in remarkable detail. These cylinders of ancient ice contain tiny bubbles of air, samples of Earth's atmosphere from hundreds of thousands of years ago. By analyzing these bubbles, scientists can reconstruct past levels of carbon dioxide and match them with temperature data derived from isotopes in the ice. The result is a clear, undeniable pattern. When carbon dioxide goes up, temperatures rise. When carbon dioxide goes down, the Earth cools. And yet carbon is not acting alone. It is working in concert with other parts of the Earth system. Let's explore a few of the key feedback loops in more detail. First, there's the ice albedo feedback. Albedo is a measure of how much sunlight a surface reflects. Snow and ice have a high albedo. They reflect most of the sunlight that hits them. Darker surfaces like ocean water or soil have a low albedo and absorb more heat. So when ice melts, it exposes darker surfaces, which absorb more heat, causing more ice to melt. And so on this loop helps explain why polar regions are especially sensitive to climate change. It also means that small changes in temperature can have outsized effects in icy environments. Next, there's the permafrost feedback. Permafrost is soil that has been frozen for at least 2 consecutive years, and in many cases for tens of thousands of years. It contains massive amounts of organic carbon, dead plant and animal matter that never fully decompose because of the cold, but as the climate warms, permafrost begins to thaw. When it does, microbes wake up and start breaking down the organic material, releasing carbon dioxide and methane. Methane is particularly concerning because it is more than 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. So as permafrost thaws, it can release large amounts of greenhouse gases, which in turn cause more warming, more thawing. And so on this feedback loop is already happening in parts of Siberia, Alaska, and Canada. Scientists are observing lakes that bubble with methane as thawed. Ground beneath them becomes anaerobic and carbonary. There are even areas where the ground collapses into large craters, sometimes called thermocast pits, due to sudden thawing of ice-rich soil. Another carbon climate feedback involves forests absorb carbon dioxide as they grow, making them powerful carbon sinks. But when forests are stressed by drought, heat waves, pests, or fires, they can stop absorbing carbon and even begin releasing it. For example, a severe drought can cause trees to close their stomata to conserve water, reducing photosynthesis. If the drought is prolonged, trees may die, and their decomposition releases stored carbon. Fires accelerate this process dramatically. In recent years, we've seen intense forest fires in places like Australia, the Amazon, and the American West. These fires release vast amounts of carbon dioxide in a matter of days, turning ecosystems that once absorbed carbon into major sources of it. Then there's the ocean. As we discussed before, the ocean plays a crucial role in absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But this capacity is not unlimited. Warmer water holds less gas, and changing ocean currents and stratification can limit the mixing that brings carbon to deeper waters. In addition, ocean acidification caused by increased carbon dioxide can affect marine organisms that use carbonate to build shells. If these creatures struggle to survive, the biological carbon pump may weaken, reducing the ocean's ability to sequester carbon. These feedbacks matter because they can influence the pace and intensity of climate change. Some like the ice albedo effect act quickly. Others, like permafrost thaw or changes in ocean circulation, unfold over decades or centuries. But all of them interact with carbon in complex ways, sometimes stabilizing the climate, sometimes pushing it toward new states. Let's take a step back now and consider Earth's climate history. In the deep past, more than 600 million years ago, during a period known as Snowball Earth, the planet may have been almost entirely covered in ice. How did we get out of such a frozen state? One theory involves a slow buildup of carbon dioxide from volcanic activity. With weathering largely shut down by ice cover, there was little to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Over millions of years, volcanic emissions build up, eventually creating a greenhouse effect strong enough to melt the ice. This dramatic transition may have paved the way for the explosion of complex life during the Cambrian period. At the other extreme, during the mid-Cretaceous period around 100 million years ago, carbon dioxide levels were several times higher than today and temperatures were much warmer. There were no ice caps, sea levels were higher, and dinosaurs roamed lush forests near the poles. These ancient climates remind us that Earth's system is capable of existing in very different states depending on the balance of carbon and energy. Today, we are rapidly adding carbon to the system. The worry is not just that we are warming the planet, but that we may be triggering feedback loops that amplify that warming beyond our control. However, the same understanding that reveals these risks also points toward solutions. By preserving forests, protecting permafrost, restoring wetlands, and managing the ocean's health, we can help buffer the climate system against its own potential instability. In the end, feedbacks are not good or bad. They're natural parts of how Earth responds to change. They magnify, modulate, and sometimes resist new forces. And in that delicate balance of amplifiers, And dampeners lies the story of our climate past, present, and future. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine the world breathing slowly over Ian's, picture glaciers advancing and retreating forests spreading and shrinking carbon rising into the air, then sinking into stone feedback loops, swirling quietly in the background, shaping the path of life. And the landscapes we call home, the climate, is not static. It is a conversation, a looping dialogue between sunlight, ice, air, water, and stone, and carbon always. Carbon is whispering in every sentence. Take a moment to imagine a world before engines, before factories, before electricity, or steel. The forests were dense and untouched rivers ran their course. Without dams, the air was filled with bird song, smoke only rising from the occasional cooking fire. Carbon still moved through the cycle between trees, oceans, air, and soil, but slowly, gently as it had for millions of years. And then with the turn of key in, the 18th century,